Good morning, everybody. If you've looked at your syllabus, you know that today we're going to be talking about the three-act structure for screenplays. The three-act structure. Now, that would seem to be simple enough, but we're going to cover the basics of the three-act structure today. Later in the course, we're going to be getting into more detail and more specifics because I think you'll see over the course that the three-act structure, while paramount to understanding screenplays, can be awfully complex and detailed. But I'd like to ask anyone what they think the three-act structure came from. Where did we get the three-act structure? And you're saying that you had heard that they were created in the early 1900s and then later by Sid Field, who is the recognized guru in screenwriting, and he talked a lot about the three-act structure. But I want to tell you a little story about how the three-act structure started. And this three-act structure really starts back in the year 335 BC. That's when Aristotle wrote his book called Poetics. And while it dealt with a number of things, it dealt with the genesis of the three-act structure. Now, if you've read Poetics or you've looked at it, Aristotle really doesn't talk about the three-act structure. What he really does is attend a lot of Greek plays. And in these plays, he starts to recognize a structure of some kind. And he writes these notes about his observations, what he sees in the plays. And they all seem to have a pattern. And those patterns he kind of sees divided up into three units: a beginning, a middle, and an end. And while that may seem simple enough, and it is, quite frankly, you know, when you think about the three-act structure, it applies to novels, it applies to life. We have birth, we have life, and then we have death. That's a three-act structure. And just about everything we do is broken up into three acts. So Aristotle wrote about that, and then later playwrights took it on and used it, but they developed a number of other acts. Horace developed 5 and 7 acts. Shakespeare wrote sometimes in 5 acts. But we still get back to the fundamentals of the three-act structure. And that's what I want you to get, is those fundamentals. Then later on, when you become a great screenwriter, you can deviate from that and perhaps do something a little bit different. But this is the fundamental, the three-act structure. And I want to show you basically what we have here in the three-act structure. And you can see that Act 1 is the setup. That's the beginning. And in the setup, we learn who the characters are. We learn what the premise of the movie is going to be about, what the whole play is about. So we see the introduction of that. And then in Act 2, we see the confrontation. That's the middle part of the movie. And that's the body, and that's where most of the action takes place, incidentally. So you'll see it has more time spent in the Act 2 than in Act 3. And then Act 3, we see that is where we have the resolution. That's where everything comes to a conclusion. Even the subplots, the plot and the subplot come to a conclusion in the resolution. Now, along the way, we see these little dots here. Those dots, and we'll talk more about those during the course of the course, but those are plot points, and they will pivot the story in a different direction. And they happen at certain times, like in the setup, it happens near the end, not necessarily at the end, but it'll pivot the movie into the rising action into Act 2. And then in Act 2, we'll see towards the end of that another plot point that will send it into Act 3. We'll have a crisis at the beginning of Act 3. And we can see then it starts to resolve that. So as you start writing your screenplay, keep these fundamentals in mind. And as I say, during the course, we will get into more detail so that you can emphasize certain points. But that's your basic structure. When you think of the 3-act structure, think of an arc, that things have a beginning and they rise and then they resolve themselves. It doesn't necessarily have to be a complete half circle. It's more like this, but it is an arc. And in this 3-act structure, we deal with scenes and sequences that make up each act. So think of it like this. You have a scene, which is one shot of something happening, and then you have a sequence, which is a number of scenes that make up that sequence, but they're all adjoined by one idea. Now, each scene has its own arc, a beginning, middle, and end, that make up the sequences, and a sequence has its own beginning, middle, and end. Then all of those put together, then going to make our entire screenplay. And it has its own arc, beginning, middle, and end. Now I'll have a short film for you at the end of this session that will reinforce what I'm talking to you about the 3-act structure. So I think it will help you keep innermost in mind. As you start writing your screenplay, and we'll be working on that throughout, there's some things I want you to do first in this whole arc and this whole structure. I want you to think about and define what your story is, how it's going to end. I want you to do that first. That's the first thing you do. Don't even start writing your screenplay. Write your ending of your story that you're going to tell, number one. Number two, I want you to define the beginning of your story. And then I want you to define the ending of the first act and the ending of the second act in that order. Why do you think I want to do that? Yes, that's correct. I want to do that so you have on paper, certainly in your mind, where you're going. You have some structure before you even write the first word. So that's what I'm asking you to do. Write the ending, write the beginning, write the ending of Act 1 and the ending of Act 2. And then we will fill in here with other details as to how you write that screenplay. So you have your story in mind. Now you have a basic structure in mind. And now you can start working towards writing your screenplay, which we will workshop during the course. Each night we'll take one person's screenplay and we'll workshop it. So I have this movie for you that I think will reinforce what the 3-act structure is all about. And when, as I say before, when you get to be a great screenwriter, you can deviate from this. You'll see in other presentations, in other books, oh, you need to do this, you need to do this. Don't confuse yourself with a lot of other material right now until you get the fundamentals of the 3-act structure down. So thank you for listening. And are there any questions? If you have any questions, all right.